Every day, hundreds of thousands of individuals go missing worldwide. Although many are quickly found or return on their own, about a third are discovered deceased eventually. The remainder disappear without a trace, their fates enshrouded in mystery. Mysterious and unsolved cases of disappearances frequently captivate the public and become the basis for detective novels or fantasy films. Yet sometimes reality can be more terrifying than fiction. The disappearance of 19-year-old student Katie Poore stands out as particularly unique. Her case was so baffling that even NASA experts participated in the effort to find her. Despite their best efforts, she could not be found alive. This shocking event deeply affected the nation, especially the normally peaceful town of Moose Lake, where Katie resided along with other students. Katie Elizabeth Puya was born on February 28, 1980 in the quaint town of Duluth in St. Louis County, Minnesota. She was the second child in a loving and ordinary family. She grew up with her older brother, and they shared a strong bond since childhood. When Katie started school, the family relocated to Carleton County and settled in Barnum. Katie was known for being sociable, active, and highly creative. She studied vocals, played guitar, and eventually began performing in a music band where she happily showcased her talents. Katie also had a deep love for animals. She volunteered at a shelter for stray cats and dogs and participated actively in cleaning and beautifying local parks. Her beauty was well recognized. In high school, she even participated in a city beauty contest where she achieved second place. After high school graduation, she attended college and moved to Moose Lake, a quiet and picturesque town in the same county as her family. By that time, Katie had been dating Mark for a couple of years. They both went to university and planned to get married. The couple rented a small but cozy apartment in a good neighborhood. Katie attended law school to study criminal law while her fiancé focused on computer technology. They both worked part-time jobs to support themselves financially, save for their wedding, and avoid relying on their parents. Katie secured a job at a gas station near a busy highway where she took night shifts several times a week. She enjoyed this work because it allowed her to manage her schedule efficiently. However, her parents were concerned about her safety since she was alone at the shop during nighttime along the highway connecting several large cities. A place bustling with traffic around the clock with various people visiting the gas station and store. Despite their concerns, Katie reassured them that there was no need for worry due to surveillance cameras everywhere and the presence of a nearby popular diner that remained crowded most of the time. On May 26, 1999, 19-year-old Katie Puya went to the store for her regular shift. It appeared to be an ordinary day. She switched with her colleague who had worked during the day and took up her position behind the cash register. Around midnight, a woman came by the gas station, filled her tank with gasoline, and walked into the store to pay and buy some snacks. After gathering her items, she approached the cash register but found it unattended. Confused, she waited for a while, then went to the utility room and called out. There was no answer. This felt strange since the store was fully operational. Lights on, doors unlocked. When no clerk appeared after 10 minutes, she decided to contact the police. Police arrived promptly, examined the store and its surroundings, but found nothing unusual or alarming. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood traces. Everything was in place, including a good amount of money in the cash register. Robbery was ruled out immediately. Initially, it was assumed that Katie might have left voluntarily due to an urgent matter. However, all her personal belongings were still in the store. Keys to her house and car included. Her vehicle was parked outside. This posed a question. How did Katie leave on foot? Abandoning her car and purse seemed unlikely, pointing towards a more troubling scenario. The police reached out to Katie's parents to report her disappearance and inquire if they had any clues about her whereabouts or any reasons she might have abruptly left. Mr. and Mrs. Puya assured them that Katie was always responsible and would not abandon her duties as she highly valued her job. Katie's fiancé corroborated their statements, expressing his utter confusion regarding her sudden disappearance. At this point, Katie Puya was officially reported missing and the store treated as a potential crime scene. The investigation kicked off with a review of footage from 4 surveillance cameras installed in the store. each one positioned strategically to cover every angle inside. The initial hours of Katie's shift revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing suspicious occurred during those early hours. Around 11 p.m., a girl walked into the store. She chatted with Katie for about 10 minutes, but didn't purchase anything. From their conversation, it was clear that she was either an acquaintance or friend of the missing student. Approximately half an hour later, A entered the store. He looked around but quickly left. Shortly after, he came back in. At moment, Katie had gone to the back room, and it seemed he might have been observing her from outside through the glass door. He re-entered the store and headed directly towards the back room. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in that section of the store, so what happened next is unclear. A few minutes later, Katie and this unknown man emerged from the back room together and moved toward the exit. The man was walking behind Katie, holding her by the hair with one hand and pressing his other hand against her back. It was evident that he was threatening her with a weapon, likely a knife or gun, and forcing her to leave with him. Essentially, this constituted an abduction from her workplace. This information was crucial. However, further investigation faced challenges because there were no cameras at the gas station adjacent to the store or in its parking lot. Consequently, determining where the suspect took Katie, his vehicle details, and his direction of travel was impossible. Given that the gas station and store were situated on an isolated stretch near a busy highway with no places to hide or go except along the road, it's likely someone would have seen if he had forcefully led her away on foot and contacted law enforcement. Therefore, it's presumed that he took her to the parking lot and placed her in his car. Another problem arose from the poor quality of the video footage from existing cameras. It was 1999 after all, and having any cameras at all back then was quite fortunate. The videos were grainy black and white images that rendered identifying features unclear, making it difficult to create a facial composite swiftly. Law enforcement and volunteers who joined the search scoured several miles around the gas station and store looking for possible clues, but found nothing conclusive. Investigators also interviewed Melinda, the sole witness who spoke with Katie shortly before she vanished. Melinda confirmed she was a close friend and fellow student working part-time at a nearby diner. She mentioned seeing a suspicious man harassing both a customer inside the diner and another woman in the parking lot earlier on, suggesting to each woman that they should get better acquainted. Both declined his suggestions and walked away separately. Melinda's work shift ended at 11 p.m. As she locked the door and prepared to go home, a man showed up again. He approached, asking if the restaurant was closing and what time it would open in the morning. Melinda found his question odd and hurried to inform Katie about the visitor, suggesting they call the police. Katie, however, reassured her that everything was fine since the store had plenty of cameras. Melinda then remembered the man drove a black Ford F-150 pickup truck. They left the parking lot around the same time, but he overtook her quickly. She recalled part of his license plate, 5 and 57, and the letter Y. This was an important clue, but in the late 90s, without a national electronic database, locating the vehicle took time. Both Melinda and another witness at a gas station provided only rough descriptions of the suspect. Given it was dark outside, they couldn't get a clear look at him. They described him as a white male with long blonde hair, aged between 35 and 40. He spoke without an accent and wore a baseball cap that partially hid his face. The surveillance videos were not much help either due to low resolution. For the first time, police sought help from NASA specialists to enhance image quality and reveal more details of the suspect's face. Using advanced technology meant for astronomical purposes, they reconstructed a clearer image of him. The task was complicated, strange angles, as he never looked directly at any camera in the footage. Still, authorities were satisfied with the final composite portrait. This portrait was distributed to police stations statewide and frequently shown on news channels. Citizens were urged to stay vigilant and report any sightings of individuals matching this description or driving a similar vehicle. Soon after, police began receiving dozens of calls daily, though most turned out to be false leads. About a couple of days later, authorities detained a 25-year-old man who bore a strong resemblance to the individual, the composite portrait. Additionally, he had a prior criminal record for robbery and harassment. However, he was soon released due to a notable distinguishing feature: a large tattoo covering his entire arm, which the suspect in the video did not have. An important detail was that the man who escorted Katie out of the store wore a Yankee baseball team t-shirt with the number 23. According to Melinda, when the suspect approached her in the parking lot, he was dressed differently. Yet upon reviewing the surveillance footage, she had no doubt it was him. A week later, a call came from Minneapolis. A worried man reported that the person in the portrait looked like his neighbor, who worked as a cleaner and drove a similar car. A couple of weeks ago, right around the time of the girl's abduction, this neighbor unexpectedly cut his long blonde hair and began growing a beard. This suspect turned out to be 50-year-old Donald Hutchinson. It was discovered that he had recently quit his job without any apparent reason, which raised suspicions. On the day of Katie's disappearance and the following day, he didn't go to work because he reported not feeling well. Former colleagues confirmed that he drove a black Ford F-150 with a license plate matching what police were looking for. Donald Aubin Hutchinson's real name is Donald Allen Blom. He was born in Minnesota in 1949 and grew up in a dysfunctional family where his father was an alcoholic who abused both him and his mother. As a teenager, Donald himself started drinking and displayed uncontrollable aggressive behavior that troubled everyone around him. Consequently, he was transferred to a special school for difficult children. At age 25, Blom was convicted and imprisoned after kidnapping and assaulting a 14-year-old girl. However, he served only 3 years before being released on parole. Shortly after, he was arrested again for assault and harassment, but received another short sentence. In 1983, Donald was arrested yet again. This time, he had kidnapped 2 teenage girls, taken them to a deserted area, and tied them to a tree. He assaulted one of the girls and strangled the other several times, then revived her, making it a game of life and death. Fortunately, a passerby walking with a dog heard their screams and saved them. Consequently, Blom served 9 years in prison. Upon his release, he changed his name, moved to another city, and avoided police attention for a long time. He got married after his release, and his wife bore him 4 children. On the surface, their family appeared happy. The man secured employment. However, his addiction to alcohol and substances turned him into a menace. His wife and children often suffered from his violence, but occasionally this monster sought other victims. Nobody was aware of Donald's criminal past. He went to great lengths to conceal it by changing his name and identity. He even altered his appearance by growing long hair and a beard that he sometimes shaved off. Initially, the police lacked solid grounds to detain him. They could only question him during their investigation. The suspect owned around 20 acres of land just 12 miles from the store where Katie was kidnapped. In fact, right after Katie's disappearance, the police had already visited him upon learning about his black pickup truck. Donald claimed that he had sold the vehicle and that its license plate differed from the one they saw. He even provided a document as proof, which later turned out to be fake. Following these findings, the police secured a search warrant for his house and land property. They discovered an unexpected surprise in a large barn where Donald attempted to hide his black Ford F-150 behind old junk and furniture. The license plate matched the one identified by Melinda. With this discovery, Donald's calm facade began to crack. Nonetheless, he continued denying any involvement in Katie's disappearance. Yet even with this significant lead, the pickup truck, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him at that point. The suspect's license plate was only a partial match, and there were neither witnesses nor video evidence confirming that Katie had been taken in that specific car. Consequently, the police shifted their focus to searching the house, aiming to find traces of the missing girl or even Katie herself. The interior was spotless. No blood traces, no signs of forcible confinement, and no clues linked to Katie's disappearance were found. However, inspecting the property posed challenges as it spanned over 24 acres and required more than a day's effort, along with significant resources. To address this, National Guard personnel and hundreds of volunteers joined in the search and investigation efforts. The first day yielded no results. By the end of the second day, however, Police stumbled upon peculiar ashes suggesting that something had been burned or cremated over an extended period. Among these ashes were bone fragments, which criminologists meticulously collected and sent to a laboratory for analysis. While most bones were animal remains, parts of a human skeleton were also discovered, including a tooth that warranted closer examination. Experts identified that the bones belonged to a young woman aged between 18 and 23 years old. However, DNA testing faced complications because prolonged exposure to high temperatures had destroyed much of the material. When criminologists from other states joined the investigation, they managed to extract a DNA fragment matching the DNA of the missing girl. Unfortunately, this crucial evidence was deemed only indirect and could not conclusively establish the suspect's guilt. Hence, it became imperative to analyze the tooth found among the ashes to determine if it belonged to Katie. It was revealed that this tooth contained a rare filling made of silicone and zirconium, an innovative dental material. Conversations with Katie's dentist confirmed this unusual filling. He immediately recognized his work since he had used materials obtained from an international dental conference on her just a week before she vanished. Though all collected evidence remained circumstantial collectively, a combination strong enough, it sufficed for law enforcement officials to arrest Donald and detain him until trial proceedings concluded. Thus unfolded developments leading up to his incarceration pending further proceedings. On June 22, 1999, the man immediately pleaded not guilty, sought legal counsel, and expressed his willingness to cooperate with the investigation. During a more thorough examination of his belongings, law enforcement discovered multiple firearms for which he lacked permits. Shortly thereafter, Donald began confessing. He admitted to kidnapping Katie from the store, bringing her to his property where he strangled her and subsequently burning her body. However, he denied any coercion related to intimacy with the victim, attributing his inability to do so to the significant amount of alcohol and illegal substances he had consumed. Donald further claimed that he used only firewood and paper to incinerate the remains, but experts asserted that this method alone wouldn't suffice without additional fuel. That evening was marked by aimless driving around the neighborhood. Upon noticing Melinda at a gas station, Donald initially intended to follow her when she left, but then changed his mind. He overtook her and proceeded home to change clothes before heading back to the store where Katie worked. This accounts for discrepancies in eyewitness testimony regarding what he was wearing. 2 weeks later, Donald unexpectedly recanted his confession, asserting his innocence once again. He alleged that he had been coerced into confessing due to threats made against him and his wife. His wife attempted to support this claim during the trial by offering an alibi, asserting that he was at home with her throughout that evening and did not leave the residence. In a striking turn of events during the trial, 2 former victims from 1983 came forward. They testified about their experiences with Donald, depicting him as a ruthless sadist who had subjected them to torture and exploitation. The evidence presented along with the witness statements led the jury to unanimously declare the defendant guilty, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of. Subsequently, Donald's wife admitted she lived in fear of her husband, habitually beat her and their children. She expressed that she felt compelled to provide him with an alibi out of fear for her own safety. After disclosing, she changed her last name, took their children, and moved to another state where they wouldn't be known. On a related note, detectives working on this high-profile case suspected that Blom could be a serial rapist and murderer. They linked him to several unsolved crimes involving the disappearance of young girls under similar circumstances. Specifically, he was suspected in the strangling of Wilma Johnson, found in 1983, as well as the 1993 abduction and murder of student Holly Spangler. In 2021, Blom was transferred to a medium-security prison at MCF Faribault. Conditions there were much more lenient, and he referred to it as a vacation. However, after complaints and protests from Katie's family, Blom was moved back to a high-security facility in Stillwater, Minnesota. He passed away there on January 10, 2023, at age 73. Katie Pure's death has been covered extensively in popular television documentaries about real crimes. HLN Channel aired a series called Forensic Files, which featured an episode titled Tooth or Consequences, based on Katie's story. The Discovery Channel released an episode from their series New Detectives titled Fatal Abduction, dedicated to this particular case. Additionally, in 2010, a documentary titled From the Ashes was produced using materials from the investigation. A security guard is patrolling a truck stops of America stop on North 1st Avenue just off of Interstate 24 as per usual. As this truck stop in Nashville is incredibly busy and borders on an area that has a high crime rate, security guards regularly patrol the area, and it is also overseen by a network of CCTV cameras. As he continues walking, he soon makes a horrifying discovery. The body of a woman is found. She has been shot dead and posed on her back with her feet together and legs apart, with her arms above her head. He quickly calls emergency services. Little did the police know, this would put them in a race against time to find a sadistic serial killer before he struck again. 25-year-old Sarah Hulbert had had a difficult life. After losing her mother at a young age, she was sent to live with relatives out of state. She would later move back to Tennessee to be closer to her siblings. After falling in love, she would go on to have 2 daughters who were the center of her world. The happiness was not to last, however. She would soon spiral into a drug addiction after her relationship had fallen apart and she had become a single mother as a result. She had tried to beat her crack cocaine addiction for the sake of her 2 young children. As she continued to fall deeper into drug addiction, her daughters were removed from her care. In bids to get clean, she would be in and out of rehab several times. But without her children, she spiraled further into the destructive addiction that had taken so much from her. She had become a sex worker to buy drugs and would often visit truck stops to make money. Detective Sergeant Pat Postolione arrived on scene at the truck stop. One thing that immediately stood out to him was the lack of blood at the scene. This indicated the victim had been killed elsewhere, and then her body had been moved to that location and posed in the lewd position. Due to the positioning of the body and lack of evidence from the scene of the crime, it was the worst fears of officers that this was not a first-time killing. This was someone who had killed before. The task that lay before the officers was huge. This was an incredibly busy truck stop with truckers and people coming and going all the time. But one thing they knew was that her body had been dumped there within the previous 30 minutes. The security guard who had made the discovery said she wasn't there when he last checked half an hour ago. As officers found out and began conducting a search of the scene near the body, they found a footprint with an unusual sole. That was often seen in work boots. It was vital for the officers to check the CCTV, and it was this that would give them a major lead. A yellow truck is seen coming in and driving all the way to the back of the truck stop, where the body of the woman had been discovered by the security guard. 16 minutes later, the truck is seen coming back out. Checks from the stop revealed no evidence to show that the truck had stopped to refill or buy food. As the investigations of the crime scene continued, post-mortem was carried out on the victim. Her body was found to have bruises and cuts, indicating a struggle had taken place. Her body also showed signs of torture. Her rear had a significant injury, suggesting part of her skin had been cut out with a knife. Semen found inside her body was sent off to have the DNA analyzed. It was revealed that she had died from a single close-range gunshot wound, a .22 caliber gun. Running her fingerprints through the database, it came back with a match, and they could finally put a name to their victim. She was 25-year-old Sarah Hulbert. Her family were immediately contacted. They went straight to the coroner's office in disbelief, hoping that maybe it wasn't her. A few months prior to her death, she had made the decision to finally overcome her demons and was in recovery after another rehab stint. But sadly, she would later relapse and begin using again. Near to where her body had been discovered, there was a hole in the fence where drug dealers and sex workers would enter and exit the truck stop to avoid being seen by the security guards. Her sisters mentioned to the police that she had 2 known male associates who were also in the drug scene, and police believed they were with her the night she had been murdered. The men were soon tracked down and questioned. As they were involved in the drug scene, they were reluctant to talk to the investigators. However, when the seriousness of the situation they found themselves in began to dawn on them, they admitted to being her pimps. They were adamant they had absolutely nothing to do with her murder. They'd been driving around with Sarah at about 10 p.m. on June 26th and an argument had broken out. They said she exited the vehicle and went into the truck stop. Sarah Hulbert never returned. After waiting a few hours and she still hadn't come back, they assumed she must have left with the trucker, and so they too decided to leave. They agreed to give DNA samples to clear their names. When the results came in, the semen sample taken earlier did not match either of their DNA. They were ruled out as suspects. The DNA sample did not match with any sample from the sex offender database. The police then turned to the FBI for help to see if they had any cases on their nationwide database that matched the modus operandi of this one that had been committed in a different jurisdiction, and this would lead to the news that could blow the case wide open. There had been a previous murder of a woman in Lebanon, Tennessee on June 6, 2007. Just off of Interstate 40, the naked body of a woman was found in a garbage bin in a Pilot Station truck stop on Murfreesboro Road. She was later identified as 48-year-old Samantha Winters. She was a sex worker and had worked at the same truck stop where Sarah had been found. Police believed that she had been picked up at the Nashville truck stop, murdered, and then her body taken out to Lebanon. Her body had been posed and she had been killed by a .22 caliber gun. But the horrifying information did not stop there. The database had 2 more matches in different states, with these murders taking place before Sarah Hulbert had been killed. One of these victims had been a woman called Sherry Drinkard, who was 43 years old. Her naked body had been dumped and then posed, just like the other victims, in Lake Station, Indiana, by the side of the road. And she too had died from a gunshot wound to the head, fired from a .22 caliber weapon. The other victim was found in a motel car park in Georgia on the 29th of January, 2007 at 5 p.m. Like the other victims, she had died from a gunshot wound from a .22 caliber gun. They ran the fingerprints through the database to try and work out who she was. It was revealed that she was a mother of 5 from Atlanta, Deborah and Glover. She had spoken to her eldest child just a few hours before her death and asked her to tell her siblings that she had always and would always love them. She also told her not to call the number back. When she still hadn't contacted them, her daughter became increasingly concerned for her welfare. Deborah had been battling a drug addiction and working as a sex worker. In November 2006, her daughter tried to help her beat her addiction, and in December she had began to make big steps on the road to recovery. But she would soon disappear. Although Deborah had not been found in a truck stop, it was an area that was regularly used by truckers. The police now had 4 female victims spanning across different states. All sex workers, all posed in a degrading position, all dead from a .22 caliber gun. Detective Sergeant Pat Posiglione knew it was vital to revisit the Nashville truck stop to make sure that absolutely no stone had been left unturned. As he was driving, he saw a truck headed towards him, bearing a striking resemblance to the one seen on the CCTV footage, taken from the night Sarah Hulbert had been murdered. Posiglione turned around and followed the truck after calling his colleagues to tell them what he had seen and give them a description of the vehicle. He approached the truck after it had pulled into the truck stop, but got no response after banging on the door. After banging for a second time, a man pulled the window curtain back and looked down at him. Posiglione explained that he was with the police, and following this the driver opened the door and exited the truck. Posiglione would later say the driver appeared as if he had just been woken up. He was asked to present his driver's license and identify himself, and finally they had a name: Bruce Douglas Mendenhall. Posiglione engaged him in conversation, asking how long he had worked as a trucker and when the truck had last been in the area. Mendenhall said that the truck was last in Nashville in May. As the pair were talking, Posiglione spotted something. There was blood on Mendenhall's left arm and on the inside of the driver's side door. So as not to arouse suspicion, Posiglione told Mendenhall that officers were asking drivers of this kind of truck to provide DNA samples. Mendenhall signed the consent form and provided a mouth swab then and there. Posiglione asked him if he could look inside the truck. Mendenhall agreed. Behind the seats was a sleeping compartment where Posiglione found a pair of work boots. The sole bore a striking resemblance to the unusual footprints that had been found by Sarah's body. Behind the driver's seat was a black trash bag containing clothes, shoes and tissues, all soaked in blood. Mendenhall explained that when he had been trying to enter the truck a few hours prior, he had accidentally cut his leg, and that was where the blood had come from. He was asked to show the cuts, but there was none. Mendenhall's story suddenly changed. He said the blood actually belonged to a sex worker he had picked up the night before, and she had cut her hand. Posiglione knew it was vital to ensure that Mendenhall did not have access to any weapons. Mendenhall explained that he did have a gun in the truck and handed it over to Posiglione. It was a .22 caliber rifle. Posiglione knew the game was up and bluntly asked him if this was the truck the police had been looking for. He asked several times before Mendenhall shrugged his shoulders and said, "If you say it is." Posiglione asked him if he was the person they had been searching for. Mendenhall gave the same response. He shrugged his shoulders and replied, "If you say so." By this point, Posiglione's partner had arrived on scene, and after he was escorted out of the truck, Bruce Mendenhall was arrested. It was vital to secure the truck and preserve any evidence, so it was sent to a crime lab to be processed. Over 300 items from his truck were cataloged as evidence, including handcuffs, knives, tape, and sex toys. Blood spatter was found on the walls, mattress, floor, and ceiling. The news that came next was more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. It emerged that the blood belonged to 7 different women. The bloody clothing found in the bag belonged to a sex worker from Indiana. Her family had not yet realized she had gone missing. The bullet that had killed Sarah Hulbert had been fired from the gun found in his truck, and the blood on the gun came back to her and at least one other woman. Mendenhall signed a rights waiver and said he would voluntarily give them a statement without the presence of a lawyer. But who exactly was Bruce Mendenhall? He had been born on April 14, 1951 in Crawford, Illinois. As an adult, he had lived on Pine Street close to downtown Albion. A neighbor from Pine Street would later say that visitors wouldn't often come to the Mendenhall household, adding, "He was a little different." In 1997, he had ran in the mayoral elections, but incumbent Reverend Bill Rucker had won in a landslide. Mendenhall had come in last place. When looking into Mendenhall's background, the police discovered a man with no record of violence, and he had not had any run-ins with the law. On the face of it, he appeared to be a typical family man, married with 2 grown-up daughters. Jimmy Nesbitt reported for the Courier-Press that Mendenhall had later moved into a small home in the country, surrounded by farms. This house would later be searched by police to try and help build a picture of who he was and add to their evidence. One of his neighbors recalled that Mendenhall and his wife had shown up on her driveway, his wife asking her if she wanted to purchase anything from a catalog. Mendenhall stayed in the vehicle. The neighbor said he just sat in the car and had a weird look on his face. The report in the Courier-Press also said he would often ignore his neighbors if they tried to interact with him. The mayor of Albee and Ryan Hallam would say he hadn't really had any run-ins with the law. Everybody thought he was a little mouthy and so forth like that. Anything off kilter? No, not too much. The minister from the church close to the Mendenhall's home said that after he was arrested, his family was struggling to come to terms with the news. The news of his arrest was the talk of the town. Mayor Hallam said, "We've got 2,000 people. The news spreads like wildfire. People in Albion could not believe that one of their own was capable of such horrific crimes. Everyone's in disbelief that we had an individual living here like this. He didn't mix well with others around him, but we never had any problems with him," said Mayor Hallam. It was now time for the police to interview their suspect, but before they knew it, he made a shocking admission. He said that he had dumped the bodies, but he hadn't killed any of them. He explained that 2 men, Richie and David, were the real murderers they were looking for. He said they would go to every truck stop he went to, and by the time they left would be a dead body in his truck. He would later say that a 3rd person named Terry was also involved. He said they would leave him to clean up. He told the officers they would always use his gun to kill the women, and then leave their bodies in his vehicle. When talking about Sarah Hulbert, he said that he had gone into the truck stop, and when he came out, he found her dead body in his truck. He said that, in a moment of panic, he took her body out of the truck and left her on the ground in the far corner of the stop. He told Posiglione, "I'm pissed off at Richie and David because they did all the killings. Officers did look into his claims and found that the 3 men in question did actually exist. They were all interviewed and their fingerprints and DNA samples were taken. It turned out he had had altercations with all of these men over minor things. He then offered up another shocking confession. The latest murder had actually taken place the day before in Indiana. They then presented him with the evidence that they had gathered from the truck. Despite his claims, there was only one set of prints on the gun Bruce Mendenhall's. There was also no evidence to prove that any of those men had been in the back of the truck. When Mendenhall was asked if he was the killer, refused to talk anymore and requested a lawyer. The police, assisted by the FBI, worked in collaboration with investigators from the other jurisdictions where the murders had occurred. Using fuel receipts, they constructed a timeline of his movements and were able to place him in the locations the victims' bodies had been found. But what could the motive possibly have been? Posiglione would later say in a documentary, he thought that it was potentially his hatred of sex workers. There would be at the truck stops and his desire to degrade them post-mortem with the lewd posing of their bodies. Mendenhall's daughter disagreed and would say, he never had a negative thing to say about anyone who chose that lifestyle. There's people like that will do that. Everybody knows that. Dad? He didn't really pay attention to it. He was charged with criminal homicide and taken to the Metro Davison County Jail, where he was held without bond. Following this, it was time for Bruce Mendenhall to go on trial for the murder of Sarah Hulbert. His attorney Jason Gickner said that he had entered a plea of not guilty by video arraignment. The prosecution's case rested heavily on the plethora of physical evidence that had been gathered. Prosecutors were not seeking the death penalty, as there were no aggravating circumstances that are required in the state of Tennessee. They also ensured that the jury were reminded of Sarah and who she was. They wanted to emphasize that she was a real person, with children and a family who cared deeply for her. She was not just another piece of the evidence. After closing arguments, the jury retired to consider the evidence, and before long, they had reached their verdict. Bruce Mendenhall was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Sarah Hulbert. In Tennessee, a first-degree murder conviction and subsequent life sentence is interpreted to mean 60 years in prison. A shocking story would soon be reported. Whilst in prison, his wife had passed away from natural causes. Following her death, Mendenhall received the insurance money. He used this money to offer $15,000 to 2 inmates to kill the 3 men he had tried to blame for the murders. One of the murders was due to be staged as a copycat, to mislead the police into thinking the real murderer was still out there, but it didn't stop there. He had allegedly tried to have 2 investigators, Pat Postiglione and Lee Freeman, murdered. Postiglione would later remark that in his career spanning more than 3 decades, he had never known of someone trying to have him murdered. He said, when you are putting people away in prison, potentially for the rest of their lives, I guess you could possibly become a target for those reasons. So we take it very serious. In 2010, he went on trial for these offenses. The court heard from the 2 inmates he had tried to pay to commit the murders. One of them was in prison for explosives charges. Was asked by prosecutor Rachel Sobrero, what were his words to the best of your recollection? He replied, how much C4 would it take to blow up a trailer? They also heard from the other inmates who were serving 10 years on burglary charges. He was belligerent about those 2 officers. He wanted those 2 officers dead. That's point blank what he said. At around 2:30 p.m., the jury retired to deliberate, and less than 4 hours later, they had reached a verdict. He was found not guilty of the allegations relating to wanting to have the 2 officers killed. When it came to the plot to have the 3 other men killed, he was convicted. Davidson County Criminal Court Judge Steve Doser sentenced him to 30 years in prison, 10 years for each count that would be served consecutively. He was also charged with the murder of Samantha Winters. On the 2nd of August 2007, Mendenhall waived his right to a preliminary hearing, and a few weeks later, on the 17th, Bruce Mendenhall was indicted by a Wilson County grand jury for the murder of Samantha Winters. Prior to standing trial in this case, Mendenhall filed an appeal against his conviction for the murder of Sarah Hulbert. He argued that his legal counsel had been ineffective. He said there were 7 possible suspects and that his lawyers could have shown evidence to demonstrate this. However, it was noted that he had failed to give said list to the court. His appeal also said he wanted further DNA testing to be carried out. The Tennessee Criminal Court of Appeals rejected this. Since his appeal had been rejected, the trial for Samantha's case could now go forward. His lawyer said, "If you look at the crime in Lebanon under the truck stop murders, it's really not the sign of a serial killer. They got a lot of blood evidence. They've got pages of blood evidence, but none of it is from Samantha Winters. It's from Sarah Holbert." But the prosecution fired back saying, "I don't care what kind of person Samantha Winters was, what kind of life she led. She didn't deserve this." When all the evidence had been presented, the jury would deliberate for less than 2 hours before they returned a verdict of guilty for abuse of a corpse and first-degree murder. He again was sentenced to life in prison. In 2008, it was reported he had been linked to yet another killing. 28-year-old Letitia Yvonne Milliken had gone missing from Nashville. She was living in a makeshift camp off of Hermitage Avenue amongst other homeless people. She had also been a sex worker. Postolione had worked with her family to try and find her. Her family hadn't heard from her for the last couple of months. And on the 26th of June 2007, a missing persons report was filed. The same day Sarah Hulbert's body had been found. The police had been given an item that contained Letitia's DNA to compare with some of the blood found in Mendenhall's truck. Came back as a match. Karma Papora was a 32-year-old mother to 2 children and was known to visit truck stops regularly. She had last been seen in the south side of Indianapolis, Interstate 465, at a Flying J truck stop. Sergeant Matt Mount of the NPD said, "They've taken DNA from both parents to try and match with the DNA from the blood on the clothing that was found inside the truck down in Tennessee. The DNA tests came back as a match." The police also found the clothes she had been wearing that day, her phone and her bank card. On the 10th of April, 2008, Mendenhall was charged with the murder of Karma Papora, even though her body hadn't been found. Helen Marshall, the deputy prosecutor for Marion County, said, "It definitely makes it much more difficult to proceed. We are working very hard to be able to file the case against him here." August 15th, 2011. At the 8-mile marker of the Libby B. Nunn Parkway in Kentucky, human remains were found. The medical examiner's office used DNA to identify the person. It came back as being the remains of Karma Papora. In Birmingham, Alabama, Mendenhall was charged with the murder of Lucille Carter, known as Gretna. She had been found in a bin. A bag was covering her head and face, and there was tape wrapped around her neck. She had also been left naked and, like the other women, she had died from a bullet fired from a .22 caliber gun. Indianapolis Deputy Police Chief Scott Robinette said, "Yet we have not found those victims. The brutal and depraved crimes of Bruce Mendenhall have left families and communities in tatters. His crimes are impossible to comprehend, with no motive, and the full extent of them may never be fully known. Many are holding on to the hope that they will one day have the answers they desperately need, and that their loved ones will see justice be served." On May 21, 2010, a young woman was found murdered in the apartment of 26-year-old Army veteran Sam Hare. When Sam's father discovered the gruesome scene, they frantically dialed 911. "Then I walk you to the bedroom, and that's where I saw a body of a large load of blood. I could literally call it, but Sam was nowhere in sight. Who was that woman, and what happened to her? Was Sam on the run after killing her?" Located halfway between Los Angeles and San Diego, Costa Mesa, California lies on a coastal highland overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Despite its affluence, it's a laid-back beach community at heart. No one anticipated that this beautiful place would be where Julie Kabulishi would meet her with again. Sam Hare's parents, Stephen and Raquel Hare, became concerned when they hadn't heard from their son in a while. Sam was supposed to go to his parents' house that weekend, but he never showed up. On May 22, 2010, Stephen went to Sam's apartment along with his wife. There, a horrendous scene was awaiting them. "Sam, what happened? What did you do?" Panic struck him. He immediately dialed 911. In this frantic call, Steve alerted the police that there was a dead woman lying face down in his son's bedroom with some of her clothes ripped off and blood coming down from her forehead. However, Sam was nowhere in sight. The incident came as a shock for the customary community, where murders are very rare. When police reached the apartment, they did not find any signs that a struggle had taken place. The apartment seemed to be filled with items you'd find in a typical bachelor pad. Empty beer bottles, burnt cigarettes, a patio barbecue. But it looked relatively clean and neat. That is, until they entered the bedroom. Then in the bedroom, which begins to look a little suspicious, on the bedside table, there's an unused knife. And there's a couple of books. One of them, a combat how-to. Another, the wonders of sex. But then when you turn to the bed, a horrendous, The bed was soaked red from the victim's blood. The deceased woman was lying partially on the bed and partially kneeling on the ground. Her pants were pulled down, exposing the lower portion of her body. From the looks of it, detectives concluded that she might have been sexually assaulted before her death. She died from 2 gunshot wounds to her head. Here waddle gaja would gaja top said Aram of the head. There was also a knife on the bedside table, but it appeared to be unused. Strangely, she was wearing a tiara, and scrawled on the back of her sweater were the words, "All yours." Her bag was found in the kitchen. From her driver's license, detectives identified the victim as 23-year-old Julie Kibushi. Julie Kibushi was born on Valentine's Day, 1987, to Japanese-American parents, June and Masa Kibushi. June was the third of 4 children and their first daughter. She'd always been referred to as my Valentine girl by her parents. From a very young age, Julie took a keen interest in dancing music. Her mother said Julie started tap dancing when she was just 5, and that passion only grew over the years. According to her friends and family, she was a pleasure to be around. Her goofy and bubbly personality made everyone laugh. Not only did she exude positivity, but she often bent over backwards to help a friend in need. On one hand, she respected her Japanese culture, but on the other, she was a free-spirited all-American girl. After graduating high school from the Orange County School of the Arts, Julie went on to study fashion design at Orange Coast Community College. Here, she met 26-year-old Sam Hare, and the two became close. She also tutored him in anthropology. She did not know that her kindness would cost her life. After scouring through the crime scene, detectives tried to piece together what had happened to this bright and beautiful young woman. All signs pointed to Sam being her killer. It was, after all, his apartment that she was found in. And now he was nowhere to be found. It was time for investigators to take a closer look at Sam Hare. Samuel Hare was born on May 29, 1983, to parents Stephen and Raquel Kalberman in Los Angeles, California. As the only child to his special education teacher father and stay-at-home mother, Sam was doted on. He was very close to his parents, visiting them often even after he'd moved away. Although Sam's physical stature was big and strong, his friends described him as a big teddy bear. He was a fun-loving and easygoing guy. At a very young age, Sam had enlisted in the United States Army and served a tour of duty in Afghanistan, and in Germany with 173rd Airborne. After 3 years, he was discharged and returned to Southern California, where he was born and raised to attend college on the GI Bill. He wanted to finish college and then re-enlist in the Army as an officer. With that goal in mind, Sam Hare enrolled himself in Orange Coast Community College, where he formed a friendship with Julie, who was 3 years younger than him. But just like many war heroes, Sam developed PTSD from the 3 years he served in the Army. Had he somehow snapped and committed the crime in a moment of passion? As Sam was nowhere to be found, detectives concluded that he was most likely on the run after murdering Julie in his own apartment. The suspicion only grew stronger when they found text messages on Julie's phone from Sam's number. At around 2:45 p.m. on May 21, 2010, Sam sent her a text saying he was going to help a friend and then head out to go to his parents. However, just 2 hours later, his tone changed when he sent her a couple of texts begging her to come to his place. From the tone of the messages, Sam seemed like a man in trouble. He was clearly upset about something. As a concerned friend, Julie agreed to meet Sam. She said she'd be there for him like a family. While Sam's family was dumbfounded by the findings and worried that his life was in danger, these texts made him look more guilty to the investigators. It showed that he planned for her to come over. Additionally, Sam's car and his passport were also missing from the apartment, leading investigators to believe that Sam was probably on the run. His passport was missing. His car was missing. I look at it every legal and colloquial access. It's odd. It's fine. But see how he has gave me our killer. Yet investigators would soon find out that there was even more to this story. Flashing back to 8 years prior, in 2002, the then 18-year-old Sebher was charged with another heinous crime. He was accused of taking part, along with 17 other men and women, in the stabbing and beating death of 19-year-old Byron Benito in Kenyan country. Allegedly, on the night of January 15, 2002, Sam, who had been friends with Benito since childhood, picked Benito up from his house and led his unsuspecting friend to an area behind a mobile home park where he was attacked and killed by a group of suspected gang members. He was charged with murder. However, in the end, he was acquitted of those charges. But that didn't change the suspicion in the minds of the investigators. Although Sam's family did not believe in this guilt, investigators were almost certain that they were after the right person. As Sam was trying to use firearms, they considered him armed and dangerous and on the run. Believing that they had a dangerous killer on the loose, authorities put an APB out for Sam. Meanwhile, the Customs Mesa police began monitoring Sam's cell phone and credit card activities in an attempt to locate him. Cops got information that there had been 4 withdrawals made from ATMs in the day since his disappearance. His credit card was also used at a pizza delivery place in Long Beach, California, just 20 miles away from Sam's house. Police expected to see Sam on the surveillance cameras, but when the bank sent them footage from the ATM cameras, they couldn't believe whom they were seeing. It was a teenager wearing a hoodie and a cap, withdrawing money from Sam's bank account. Neither police nor Sam's parents were able to identify the kid. Investigators concluded that he was most likely helping Sam either to get away or to hide. Either way, Customs Mesa police were desperate to track him down. On May 26, 2010, they received information that his credit card had been used at another pizza delivery, and they set about tracking the delivery driver. After obtaining the delivery address from them, police headed to the address to apprehend Sam, thinking that they'd finally found his hideout spot. When police stormed the house expecting to find Sam, they instead found 17-year-old Wesley Freelich along with some of his friends. Although suspected earlier, authorities almost immediately ruled out Wesley as a suspect, but he did still have Sam's credit card in possession. The teenager depicted a shocking story that investigators were not anticipating hearing. He was, in fact, given the credit card with full instructions to withdraw cash. However, it was not by Sam. He didn't even know Sam. Daniel Wozniak, a local theater actor whom Wesley met through community theater, had given them the credit card. Wozniak told Wesley that he was a bail bondsman and needed to collect money Sam owed. Perhaps any other person would have declined it. But as Wesley looked up to Wozniak as an older brother, without realizing the gravity of the situation, the 17-year-old boy agreed to help. In total, $1,900 was withdrawn from the account. The name Daniel Wozniak did ring a bell for investigators, as they'd found an invitation to his upcoming wedding in Sam's apartment. But who was this Daniel Wozniak, and what was his connection to Sam? Did he help Sam to get away, or was he an accomplice to the murder itself? Several questions were yet to be answered. 38-year-old Daniel Dan Patrick Wozniak was born on March 23, 1984, as the youngest of 3 boys. Daniel spent a lot of time with his grandparents after school due to his parents' long work hours. Dan grew up in a luxurious home, and the family often took expensive vacations. He was described as a good kid in school who mostly got very good grades. He used jokes, singing, dancing, and magic tricks to get attention from people. He loved to be the center of attention. Realizing that he had a natural talent for stage performance, Daniel started acting and singing in musicals in his early 20s. He was pretty casual about his plans for the future. He could never hold a job for long, which forced him to move from job to job with very low pay. However, as years passed, he kept his passion for acting alive and continued to work in theater. It was here, in one of his musicals, that he found the woman of his dreams, a fellow actress. After briefly dating, they decided to marry. On May 26, 2010, when police tracked down Wozniak, He was enjoying his bachelor party in Huntington Beach, California. But how was Daniel Wozniak linked to Sam Hare? As it turned out, he lived in the same apartment complex where Sam lived. Assuming that Wozniak had either helped Sam flee or hide or had been complicit in Julie's murder, cops barged into the private bachelor party for Wozniak with an arrest warrant. The blood drained from his face as soon as he saw the cops, leading the detectives to believe that he knew more than he was letting on. Police took him into custody for questioning. In the interrogation room, at first, Wozniak claimed that his only crime was participating in credit card fraud and covering for Sam. He further told the investigators that he and Sam hatched a plan to pull out all of his money from his bank account with the help of Wesley and then claim credit card theft. But Daniel claimed before they could carry out the plan, Sam made a shocking confession. He added that after this confession, he dropped Sam off at a local shopping center and had not seen him since. Nonetheless, detectives believed he was still covering for Sam and that he had more involvement in Julie's murder than he told the investigators. So, detectives tried a different strategy. They took a DNA swap from Daniel, a strategy that made Daniel very nervous. He tried to collect his composure, but detectives could tell there was something wrong. Almost immediately, he started to add more details to the story. Tell me about the saying that said, "At real doors you're dead." I told him that I needed to go see stuff from the theater. I said, "Meet me at end of the dome. Help me, Lynn. This is the end of the mud." Detectives realized that Wozniak was nervous that his DNA would show up at Sam's apartment. Although he tried to say otherwise, cracking under pressure, he kept changing his story. After a long pause, Wozniak said that he knew about Julia's murder, and he helped him get away. When detectives reminded him that they had his DNA, he reassured them that it was not going to show up on Julie's body. He was still holding on to the fact that he had nothing to do with the murder. Detectives were expecting that Wozniak would reveal more details when he suddenly decided he was done with the interview. But with so much at stake, detectives could not let him go easily without knowing the full details. They told Wozniak that he'd be arrested for the accessory to murder charge if he did not come clean and give them full details. Wozniak had a lot at stake too. He had a wedding scheduled in just 48 hours, and he did not want to miss it. Under pressure, Wozniak started to crumble. The story yet again changed a bit. Seeing that Wozniak was about to break, detectives hastened the process by bluffing about the DNA. Although in reality, DNA test results wouldn't be back for weeks, detectives claimed his DNA was found on Julie's body. Shockingly, he did not protest the claim. He rather said his DNA was on Julie's body because he was standing right over her body. As it turns out, Wozniak was not as good of an actor in the interrogation room as he was on the stage. As his lies fell apart, he dropped yet another bombshell. This was a major red flag for the detectives because only one gunshot wound was visible to the investigators at the crime scene. Only later, when an otatsu was performed, was it revealed that there was a second gunshot wound. This confession from Wozniak meant that he'd been there when she was killed, which made him an accomplice in the murder. And investigators could now officially detain him. Yet even though Wozniak was in custody, detectives still had to find Sam, and Daniel refused to talk. While detectives were searching for any clues that could lead them to Sam Hare, sitting behind bars, Wozniak called his fiancée Rachel Buffett. Whether Wozniak knew those conversations were being recorded or not, he was about to get caught in his own web of lies. As Rachel chose freedom over love, she told him that she was going to call detectives with more information. Wozniak knew he had to talk to the detectives before Rachel could. Suddenly, he was in a panic, desperate to strike the deal with the detectives that he refused only hours before. But what he told the detectives this time was beyond their imagination. For the first time, Wozniak was ready to break down the timeline of his diabolical murder plan, which started with a simple favor from a friend. On the fateful day of May 21, 2010, Wozniak asked Sam, who considered him a good friend, to help move some boxes at the Los Alamitos Theater attic in a local military base. While Sam was busy moving the boxes in the attic, in a note-down position with his back turned to Wozniak, the cold-blooded monster pulled out a gun and shot him in the head once. Initially, Sam never knew what hit him. After realizing he'd been shot, he begged Wozniak to help him. Without a shred of hesitation, this merciless killer reloaded his gun and shot him a second time, killing him instantly. After killing Sam, he was still not finished. In a cold and composed manner, he did the unthinkable by texting Julie from Sam's phone and luring her to Sam's apartment. In the utmost callousness, he left Sam's body in the attic and went to perform his play, laughing, singing, dancing, as if he did not just murder an innocent man and lure another to the same fate. Later in the night, Wozniak snuck into Sam's apartment, and once Julie was inside the apartment, he shot her 2 times in the head. He then staged the crime scene to make it look like Sam fled after assaulting and killing Julie in his apartment. However, he still needed to make sure that no one found Sam. In desperation, he proceeded to commit one of the most depraved acts possible. He returned to the attic and dismembered Sam's hands and head in an attempt to conceal the deceased's identity. He disposed of them at a nearby park. But even after these heinous acts, seemingly without a care in the world, Wozniak once again returned to the theater. In several cast party photos detectives collected later, he can be seen laughing and joking with other members. But perhaps the motive remains even more twisted than the murders themselves. It all boiled down to money. Loaded behind a kill in Sam was money in and Sam who killed. Wozniak always struggled with money and maintaining employment. At the time of the murders, he was behind 2 months in rent on the verge of getting evicted. Additionally, he had no way of paying for the grand wedding or honeymoon he planned. And that's when he learned of the $62,000 Sam had in his savings for his time served in the military. He killed 2 innocent people in cold blood, so that he could have a grand wedding and enjoy an expensive vacation. If the confession was not enough, police found the evidence bag that Rachel talked about on the phone with Wozniak, thanks to Wozniak's brother, Tim. Tim had instructions to get rid of the bag, but he instead threw it over the fence at his parents' house. That backpack was filled with incriminating evidence, including Sam Hare's financial details, passport, his bloody clothes, and most standing of all, the murder weapon. Wozniak's DNA was all over the items, suggesting that he, and he alone, committed the double homicide. There was a cornucopia of others. The DNA, expedited child cases, the victim's financial information, everything a prostitute could ever warrant, but of course that also led us to the murder weapon himself. On December 16, 2015, at the end of his trial, which lasted just 5 days, Wozniak was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. On January 11, 2016, after only 1 hour of deliberation, in what's described as one of the shortest death penalty deliberations, the jury recommended the death penalty to a very deserving Daniel Wozniak. On September 23, 2016, the judge sentenced him to death. It seemed like there was no end of deception in this case. Detectives discovered years later that Wozniak's former fiancée, Rachel Buffett, not only knew about the murder plots, but she'd been deceptive to the detectives. Though she denied all these allegations, she was arrested and charged with 3 felony counts of accessory after the fact, based on allegations that she'd lied multiple times to police investigators. On September 12, 2018, she was convicted on 2 of those counts with a maximum possible sentence of 44 months, and on November 8, 2018, was sentenced to 32 months behind bars. She was released from jail sometime in 2019. Life snatched away from 2 innocent people. Life destroyed for their family members. And all of this just so one maniac could have his dream honeymoon. The only closure that the families can get from this is that this monster is spending his last days where he can't hurt anybody else. 79-year-old Avenel Cowgill was a Texas native and had spent most of her life in East Dallas. She had lived on Ullywood Drive for 50 years, and since losing her husband Jim in 2009, she was now living alone. She had 2 daughters, Patty and Janet, who both lived out of town, and she was also a doting great-grandmother. Avenel kept herself busy, volunteering, donating to charity, and helping at her church, something she was very passionate about. Her fellow members said you couldn't have met a kinder person. She would have given you the shirt off her back and did everything she could to help out anyone who needed it. The church had become a second family for her, and the bond they all shared was very close. She was a fantastic cook and became well known for her baking, specifically her cookies, and she would often bring them in big batches for everyone to enjoy. She spent March 7th volunteering at her church, nothing out of the ordinary, mainly answering the phone in the office, as well as putting together some flyers. She left at 3:30 p.m. and made a stop at a local store before heading home. Her daughter said her usual evening routine was relaxing in front of the TV and working on her crochet. Charity was never far from her mind, and she would often spend her evenings making hats that she would donate to the homeless. March 9th was a cold and rainy day. Janet hadn't heard from her mother at all, and phoned her to remind her to put the clocks forward an hour that night. Avenel and her daughter spoke every day, but this time the usual and prompt response from her never came. Perhaps she had just stayed out later at the church, her daughter thought. Later that night, however, Janet got a call off her sister. Patty was hoping Janet had heard from their mom, as Patty hadn't heard anything for 2 days. A feeling of panic set in straight away, and they called authorities and requested a welfare check. Officers arrived at Avernal's home at around 11 p.m. They knocked on the door several times, but they too were met with silence. A stack of newspapers was sat on the front porch, and after a walk around the building, they noticed the back door was wide open. The lights and television were still on, and her knitting materials were next to her armchair. The officers turned off the television and called out her name. As they walked into the kitchen and dining area, they found her face down in a pool of blood on the floor. She had been beaten and had severe blunt force trauma. It was clear that she had been dead for a few days. Her purse, ID, along with some of her jewelry and coin collection were missing. Her kitchen bin had been emptied, and there was a wooden stool near her body, which had blood on it. There were no signs of a forced entry indicating she could have known the person or people and let them in without any concern. And after the attack happened, they ran out the back door. But being 79 years old, 5'3" and very petite, it was also entirely possible that she had opened the door before being completely overpowered. Homicide Detective Scott Sayers was handed the case and arrived there just after midnight. Janet was still holding out hope and ringing her mother's phone, praying she would suddenly pick up and have some simple explanation. Detective Sayers answered the phone and broke the awful news. 2 rewards totaling $15,000 were offered up, and police started going door to door. Family could think of no one who would have wanted to hurt her. She held no grudges and was well loved and respected in her community. None of her neighbors recalled seeing or hearing anything. This then made the police think that whoever her killer was most likely got in via the back door, as this was far less noticeable. Fortunately, her house phone had several voicemails from her bank. The fraud department had called her a day after police believed she had been killed. Attempts to be made on her credit cards that had flagged up straight away. An attempt to withdraw money had been made at an ATM at 11 p.m. the day she was last seen alive. The footage from the ATM was grainy and blurred, but it confirmed it was most definitely not Avenel using her own cards, and further supported their thoughts that she had been killed on the 7th. A few hours later, just after 2:30 a.m., a successful purchase had been made at a Walmart on Forest Lane, just a 10-minute drive from her home. Fortunately, Walmart was full of cameras and open 24/7, so officers were quickly able to take a look at the footage. The cameras showed what looked like the same man that had been at the ATM, and he can be seen pushing a shopping cart around the aisles. He then heads to the tills and attempts to make a purchase. The cart is declined and he walks away. A few minutes later, however, he returns and walks back into the electronics aisle, where he picks up an iPad. He swipes one of Avenel's cards, and this time it's successful. After this, he calmly leaves the store. At 5 a.m., Avenel's credit cards had another attempt made on them at a different Walmart around 20 miles away. Although the man had changed his clothes, it was definitely the same person. He walks to the till and attempts to purchase a laptop and an Xbox 360. The car declines several times before he gives up and leaves empty-handed. He puts his hood up before walking through the parking area towards a Whataburger restaurant 5 minutes away. While he was walking over, a silver-colored car was sat outside the restaurant. Another man gets out of the car and goes into the Whataburger. He collects his order and heads back out to the car before driving away. The man from Walmart then enters the restaurant's car park. He paces around for a while before the same silver car pulls up. He gets inside and they drive off. Although the license plate of the car could not be made out, the men weren't being discreet and were leaving a clear digital footprint for the police to follow. Sayers and his team were closing in, and they announced to the media wouldn't be long before these men were caught. They just needed that little bit more. On March 15th, Avenel was laid to rest. Her daughter said it was standing room only because so many people wanted to be there and say their goodbyes. Family and friends said although it was a beautiful day remembering her, it was overshadowed by the anger, frustration, and fear people felt. Authorities released the CCTV and the footage quickly started flooding the media. As the public started trying to help identify the two men, Detective Sayers was focusing on the iPad and sent a search warrant to Apple. They had a serial number and model and hoped Apple would be able to determine if the iPad had connected to Wi-Fi. From this, they obtained 3 addresses, one of which was a resale store called Entertain Mart. In order to process any sales, the store requests ID. Fortunately for Sayers and his team, Entertain Mart had taken the iPad, and finally a name could be put to the face. It was 28-year-old Daniel Brooks, a known heroin user who had had run-ins with the law before. Daniel had just been arrested in the city of Richardson, just several miles away from the scene of the crime in Ellwood Drive. He, along with a man named David Heron, had been arrested for attempting to steal an elderly lady's purse. David Heron fit the description of the man ordering the food and driving away with Daniel. David and Daniel had gone to school together. David had graduated from university with a degree in creative writing before going through several stints in treatment centers for his heroin dependency. Daniel soon lost his job as a veterinary assistant and started using heroin too. He would fall deeper into his addiction, later losing his apartment and began living with David in David's car. The two men were still being held in Richardson, and Sayers and his team headed over to bring them back for questioning. In a parking spot outside, police found the car, and it was evident that the men had been living in it for some time. Detective Sayers was in charge of the interviews and started with David. He said he thought David would be easier to break and get the truth from. During his first interview, David admitted to letting Daniel borrow his car with the intention of robbing someone's house to get money to buy heroin. Daniel thought this was the easiest way to get money, but David was reluctant, having lost his mother when she was strangled during a home invasion. He said he was also worried someone might be at home. It was mid to late afternoon at the time and still very light outside. Daniel decided to go through with it alone and said he would meet David once he had got what he needed. He took David's car and left him at a nearby Walgreens for about an hour. When Daniel returned, David said he noticed items in the car that were not there before. He also recalled that Daniel was no longer wearing the same clothes. Daniel appeared visibly upset and agitated, dry heaving and then throwing up. Although Daniel told him the house he robbed was empty, David said his demeanor wasn't matching up with that, and it was clear something terrible had happened. Detective Sayers then moved on to Daniel. In Daniel's interview, he admitted to using her credit cards, but said he had been given them by a dealer called Justin. He denied killing her and said he hadn't been in her house at any point. After this, he asked for a lawyer and the interview was terminated. There was no DNA of either of the men found in Avenel's home or on any of the clothes they'd seized so far, and Detective Sayers was starting to fear they might not get enough to issue a capital murder charge. But a week later, on March 28th, David's second interview got underway, and in the presence of a lawyer, he gave a new and very different story. He said Daniel had admitted to talking his way into Avenel's home by telling her he had lost his dog and needed help. Once inside, Daniel said he had started threatening her before stealing her things. David said he had asked Daniel if anything had gone wrong while he was in the house, but Daniel said all he'd done was scare her. Daniel proceeded to change out of his boots into a pair of white tennis shoes. David remembered seeing something that looked like blood on the boots, but he didn't ask any questions. Police hadn't yet checked these boots, but they happened to be the boots Daniel was wearing when he was booked into custody. They hoped that David was right, and this would definitely put Daniel inside Avenel's home. David said after this, they made the trips to Walmart and slept in the car for a few hours before going to Entertain Mart, where Daniel got $440 for the iPad. They then drove to a pawn shop in Oak Cliff to get some money for Avenel's jewelry, antique coins, her purse, and some silverware. Daniel changed his clothes again before he entered, something which the cameras inside the shop confirmed. He pawned the stolen coins for $40 before they arranged to meet a dealer called Cassie. Bought a large amount of heroin. They used the rest of the cash to pay for a motel in Oklahoma City. That night, David wrote in his diary, "No coming back. In the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma. From around the bend, the train is coming, while my feet rest securely on the tracks. A sinking ship with no captain. This is ultimate sin." A day later, all the heroin was gone, and they returned to Dallas because they didn't know any drug dealers in Oklahoma City. Every bit of David's story was checking out and was backed up by the CCTV, and fortunately for the investigating officers, the test results were now back from Daniel's boots. They were positive for Avenel's blood. After David's car had been towed and examined, her driver's license was discovered inside. The charge against David was soon dropped due to insufficient evidence, and he was charged with burglary instead. David entered a plea of guilty and was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. Daniel Brooks entered a plea of not guilty and a trial got underway. His defense team argued that Daniel's intention was to rob the house in question, but when he went in, he found her already dead inside. The defense also said that the blood on the boots was a transfer stain and had come from walking around her body and brushing against it, not from attacking her. His lawyer laid the blame firmly on David, saying he was the creator, the writer, the director, and the main actor in this travesty. Unfortunately for the police, prosecution, and family, too many jury members had doubts. On June 11, 2014, after a 5-day trial, the jury was in a deadlock, resulting in a mistrial. Prosecutors would not take this lying down, however, and found an expert specialized in blood splatter analysis. His experience and knowledge confirmed that the blood was not a transfer stain. The blood was in motion at the time it hit his boot, pointing to him being her killer. Daniel was re-indicted and again entered a plea of not guilty. This time, thanks to the hard work of the prosecutors and their new blood splatter evidence, he was found guilty of capital murder. In Texas, capital murder is punished with either a life sentence without parole or the death penalty. Daniel was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Daniel's legal team filed a motion for a new trial, which was overruled. In 2017, they then filed a challenge to the overruling, saying there were issues with the evidence and how it had been presented in court. The true crime TV show The First 48 covers the case as it was happening as part of an episode. Daniel's lawyer argued that the episode didn't present anything fairly, and this could have impacted the trial if anyone had watched it. But this was also overruled, and the judgment was affirmed. After Avenel's passing, Janet said her last box of cookies was still in the church. No one wanted to eat the last one. Janet said she talks to her mother all the time, telling her about her day and asking for her advice. "I sometimes just need her to be there to talk me through it all and give me a hug," said. Avenel Cowgirl's pastor said she will always be remembered as someone that cared deeply for others and would have done anything for anyone. Today, we'll be exploring one of the most southern states in America, Mississippi. This state is rich in amazing places, such as the Vicksburg National Military Park, a Civil War battle site, Biloxi Beach, a perfect spot for coastal relaxation. Animal lovers will definitely appreciate the Marine Mammal Studies Institute. History and architecture enthusiasts will be captivated by the town of Melrose, which boasts many stunningly beautiful homes. And undoubtedly, the Biloxi Lighthouse is an excellent place for photography. But the brightest star of the state is, of course, the renowned University of Mississippi, commonly known as Ole Miss, where our story unfolds. During the summer, when academic activities on the university campus come to an end, it becomes especially quiet. The few students who remain over the summer attend extra lectures during the day or prepare on their own for the next academic year. And in the evening, they invariably visit local bars and nightclubs. Among these students was Ellie Coastal. She was an upperclassman and stayed on campus over the summer to improve her knowledge in certain subjects. Recently, she passed an important exam for her class, Introduction to Retail, at summer school and was planning to celebrate this with her friends. A small bar with pizza and daiquiris on Oxford Square is particularly popular among the youth, so it's always filled with people, and resembles an eternal party. The dim light, loud music, and a rainbow selection of various drinks make it a place where bartenders know many of the customers by name. On the evening of July 19th, Ellie Castile met up with friends at this bar. They talked and had fun, but Ellie seemed tense and spent the whole evening messaging someone on her phone. Then she had a couple of cocktails and discreetly left. This was one of the last places where Ole Miss student Ellie Castile was seen in public. On July 20th, 2019, around 10:30 a.m. during their routine patrol, police officers discovered the body of a young woman. It was found near an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake, approximately 30 miles from the university. At the scene, the victim was found with 9 gunshot wounds to her back. Investigators collected 11 shell casings at the scene. A purse containing a driver's license and a student ID belonging to 21-year-old Alexandria Castile, a University of Mississippi student, was found nearby on the roadside. Alexandria Castile, affectionately known by friends and family as Allie, was born on September 11, 1997, in St. Louis, Missouri. A blonde-haired little girl, she grew up surrounded by the care and love of her mother, Cindy, and father, Keith. Her parents supported all her endeavors in learning new things. Ellie excelled academically and in sports, participating in track and field and golf. She loved adventures and traveling, but her dream was to attend the University of Mississippi. This special place, with its traditions and new student life, was her dream destination. Her dream came true, and she became a student at the legendary Ole Mississippi. Ellie lived in a dormitory in Oxford, Mississippi, and was popular among her peers. Friends and relatives praised Ellie, describing her as a lively and energetic person who greeted everyone with a smile. The tragic loss was a shock to the close-knit community of the lovely girl and her fellow students at the University of Mississippi, as investigators worked tirelessly to uncover the facts. Ellie's father confirmed the tragic news of her death in a Facebook post on Sunday. Yesterday, on Saturday afternoon, the Sunset Hills, Missouri, police visited us and informed us that our beautiful dear Alexandria, our sweet Ellie, was the victim of a crime, wrote Keith Castile. She was attending summer school and taught fitness at the University of Mississippi in Oxford, Mississippi. She graduated from Lindbergh High School in 2016. She was just 21 years old. "We are deeply saddened," said Interim Chancellor of the University of Mississippi, Larry Sparks, in a statement to Today. Ellie was a valued member of our student community. Lafayette County investigator, Jarrett Bundren, told CBS on Saturday morning. A white female was found on the ground with multiple gunshot wounds to her back. "I'm working on this case, and it's heartbreaking, the girl who was shot so many times." According to sources, a local resident walking their dog reported hearing gunshots early in the morning between approximately 2:15 and 2:30 a.m., initiating an investigation. Police immediately gained access to the rented apartment where Ellie Castile lived. Although the victim's phone was missing, her Apple Watch was discovered in the room. Witness interviews revealed that a few days before the incident, Ellie's parents had visited her from St. Louis, and she had shared with them how eagerly she was looking forward to the start of the new academic year at the university and had no regrets about staying on campus for the summer. Data from the Apple Watch also showed that after a phone conversation with her mother, the young woman sent several messages to someone named Brandon Teisfeld. Upon examining the messages, detectives learned that 3 months prior to the incident, Ellie had shared shocking news with Brandon. Since Brandon was the last person known to have communicated with the victim, he became a subject of interest to the police. Further examination of their messages revealed that Ellie and Brandon had been in an on and off romantic relationship. Brandon Teisfeld, a tall, dark-haired young man with an athletic build, was also a student at the University of Mississippi. He hailed from Fort Worth, Texas, and was raised in a well-mannered family. In 2016, as a freshman, Ellie met Brandon and immediately fell for him. The young people started dating, but they never officially declared themselves as a couple. While Ellie's feelings for Brandon were sincere, he never demonstrated the seriousness of his intentions towards her. Ellie's friends reported that their relationship was not always smooth. They often argued, including in public. Ellie and Brandon would periodically break up, but then they would be seen together again after some time. On April 12, 2019, Ellie wrote to Brandon that she had taken a pregnancy test and the result was positive, but she received no reply from him. She bombarded him with text and voice messages, but her boyfriend ignored her. Exactly 3 months later, he finally responded, "I don't want a child at all. Seriously, it will ruin my life. I can't help you with this and I don't plan to. It's still very early. Just take a pill or make a doctor's appointment and deal with the issue." Ellie, deeply in love, desperately wanted to meet in person to discuss the situation, but Brandon continually refused. On the fateful Friday of July 19th, Ellie went to a local bar with her friends. At 11:52 p.m., surveillance cameras captured her leaving the bar. She got into a taxi and went home. About 30 minutes later, she received a call. It was Brandon. At 1:58 a.m. on July 20th, Ellie got into Teisfeld's car for her last ride. They headed to an abandoned fishing camp by Sardis Lake. According to police reports, the drive down the dark road to the location was supposed to take about 45 minutes. Witnesses reported clearly hearing gunshots in that area between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m. Investigators contacted Brandon Teisfeld on Sunday afternoon and asked him to come to the station to talk about Ellie Costil. He found some convincing reasons to avoid coming, but assured the detectives he would meet them on Monday at 8:30 a.m. on Monday, July 22, 2019. After Brandon Teisfeld failed to appear at the police station, investigators began to track his phone. Location data showed that Brandon was heading to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. Authorities issued a BOLO, be on the lookout for his pickup, which had a distinctive license plate with TAC3IT. They also alerted all nearby police stations, and the suspect was arrested when he stopped at a gas station in Memphis. 2 days later, 22-year-old Brandon Teisfeld was placed in a local jail and charged with homicide. Teisfeld's lawyer and father claimed he was innocent. As the Oxford community grappled with the violent loss of one of their own, Ellie Costil's death quickly captured the nation's attention. Reporters eager to learn more about the student and the person charged with her death flocked to Oxford from across the country. Brandon Teisfeld insisted on his innocence until the end, but the evidence against him was more than sufficient. During his arrest, a gun matching the caliber used in the shooting near the lake was found in his possession. His car contained stained clothing, later determined by forensic analysis to be bloodstains belonging to the victim. It was established that after July 12th, Brandon had left Oxford to go home to Texas to retrieve his father's gun, allowing the prosecution to argue that the act was premeditated. His internet search history contained queries such as abortion services and abortion pills. It was later found that each time he agreed to meet Ellie, he canceled at the last minute or failed to show up without explanation. His search history also included queries on how to avoid punishment for a crime, how to conceal a crime, and how to use a weapon. A letter addressed to his parents was discovered in Teisfeld's apartment stating, "Am not a good person. This is not your fault. Something in me just doesn't work. I've always had terrible thoughts. I've always had these feelings. I just felt out of place. I think this is the end for me. I'll either go to jail or die. I know I'll get caught." On August 30th, 2019, a grand jury charged Brandon Teisfeld with the life-taking of Alexandria Costil. Yet again, he refused to accept responsibility for the incident. Brandon faced the ultimate penalty, capital punishment. However, the trial was postponed due to the widely known restrictions in place at the time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. On August 27, 2021, when the process resumed, Brandon Teisfeld, advised by his lawyer, pleaded guilty to mitigate the potential punishment. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In his final statement, Brandon apologized to Ellie's parents. "My actions have forever changed your life and the life of my family. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. I pray for God's forgiveness, and I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me too," he said. Cindy Costil, Ellie's mother, did not accept Brandon's apology, stating that he should spend the rest of his life in prison and that every time his cell door slammed shut, he should remember the heinous act he committed. Investigator Jarrett Bundren eventually disclosed some already known facts about such a brazen crime to the public. He explained, Ellie had told Brandon she thought she was pregnant. Brandon didn't want her to keep the baby, and the couple had many arguments about although Ellie wanted to meet in person to discuss the situation, refused to do so until the day of the incident. Intent on questioning Brandon, the police asked him to come to the station for some inquiries. However, the suspect seemed to resist and continued to make excuses for not being able to come in. Alarmed, the police began tracking his cell phone and realized that Brandon was heading to his home in Fort Worth, Texas. Immediately after locating Brandon, authorities alerted all police departments in the vicinity, and the suspect was arrested when he stopped to refuel at a gas station in Memphis. Upon his arrest, authorities found blood on him. Moreover, a pistol was found in his truck, the caliber of which matched the weapon used in Ellie's demise. Although Brandon insisted on his innocence and claimed he had no part in the incident, the police ultimately charged him with the crime. 5 days after Ellie's passing, normalcy had yet to return to Funk's bar, where surveillance cameras had captured her leaving shortly before midnight on July 19th. Interviews with witnesses, who were among the last to see Allie, revealed that the management had recently installed a camera right in front of the bar. A bartender who preferred to remain anonymous mentioned she had been friends with Allie since school. Taking a break from her duties, she found the words to describe her friend. She always smiled. She just lit up the room. She had a smile from ear to ear, she said. Ellie was the kind of person who greeted everyone. It's just really sad. She was too kind, she said, looking away as the colorful disco lights danced on her face. We're going to miss her. Ellie's teacher and friend, who taught the introduction to retail course, Morgan Hall, learned about the passing of her student the following Monday. She was shocked. You never expect something like this to happen in Oxford and its surroundings. During the interrogation, Morgan mentioned the last time she saw Ellie around 1:15 p.m. on July 19th when she submitted her test. She left, and I think that evening everything went downhill, she said. Ellie was a sweet girl, very quiet, and I liked having her in class, Morgan stated. After hearing about the student's demise, Morgan immediately went to the administrators to figure out the best way to deal with the situation. According to her, the university had students involved in suicides and fatal accidents, but this was something new. Morgan Hall briefly mentioned Ellie's passing in class. Counselors were ready to assist and were available on campus during that period. Anyone who wanted to postpone their final exams for a few days could do so if they needed time to grieve. My heart goes out to her parents and all her friends, she said. Parents shouldn't have to bury their children. That's not how it's supposed to work. As it turned out, Ellie Costiel, in her need for support, had told friends that she was pregnant with Brandon Thiesfeld's child. Her sisters knew she was pregnant and that she had told Brandon, said a classmate. He was very upset about it, about how it would ruin his life in future. He was angry that she wouldn't have an abortion. She said, "No, I don't believe in that." Another friend mentioned Ellie tried to enter pregnancy through unhealthy methods like long walks, drinking a lot, and using forbidden substances. She was 17 weeks along. She was struggling with it. Brandon knew about it, but he was seeing someone else. He wanted her to end the pregnancy. I think morally she didn't want to, said Ellie's close friends. He was terrible, and then she would break up with him, or he would break up with her in anger, and then come back to her saying, I'm sorry, and she always took him back. Ellie Costiel's shocked friends and classmates struggled to cope with the news and paid tribute to their friend on social media. It's just hard for me because when I see her face, all I can think about is what she went through, what she thought, what she said her friend, Pasco. It's very, very difficult. On Twitter, one of Ellie's classmates wrote on July 23rd that for years they had to listen to Ellie and discuss in detail the issues between her and Brandon. He pursued her for many years, using her for his own interests during that time. I spent countless nights holding Ellie, wiping her tears as she cried over this monster for many years, said the now deleted post. You deserve hell, a disgusting excuse for a person. Rex Ravida, a former dorm neighbor of Thiesfeld's, shared in an interview that the 22-year-old was a daddy's boy, who said he had been seeing Ellie Costiel off and on for many years just for the sake of not being bored. I genuinely believe he emotionally manipulated her into believing he loved her just as she did him, and I think he kept her on the hook until the very last second, said Ravida. Old Miss student Rex Ravida, A former dorm neighbor of suspect Brandon Teisfeld later described the alleged perpetrator as misogynistic and arrogant, stating, "I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He was very much a daddy's boy. Always had to mention his father's money, how his dad could get him out of anything, just that kind of attitude all the time, any vulgar comment he could make, any crude remark towards anyone in our dorm he got away with." On Thursday evening in her hometown of St. Louis, a memorial service was held for Ellie Costiel. At the request of the Costiles, no public statements were made in Oxford about memorial events. Only black ribbons encircling the majestic white columns of the women's houses, including Alpha Phi where Ellie lived, served as a reminder of the tragedy. The young student's demise unsettled the entire state. Michael Cunningham, a resident of Oxford, mentioned that the case has caught everyone's attention on campus. "This is the biggest news in town since football season for a long time," said Cunningham. "It's just terrible." He expressed hope that the case could be resolved soon so the Costiel family could find peace. Despite the deliberate withholding of crucial facts for the sake of investigation confidentiality, some news agencies conducted thorough investigations and reported that surveillance cameras captured Costiel on film early Saturday morning, near the location where her body was found. They reported seeing Ellie Costiel with a man, who appears to be Teisfeld, at a 24-hour store in the Harmontown area. Arafat Najib, who has owned this store for about 10 years, mentioned that police officers came to the store on Sunday and asked to review the surveillance camera footage. Najib said that the investigators did not explain why they were there and took some evidence with them when they left. According to Najib, video footage is erased every 72 hours, so there's no way to go back and see what the cameras captured. The business owner stated, "We've never had any problems or violent incidents here. This is a small town. It's quiet. Everyone knows each other. This is just madness." The Lafayette County Sheriff's Office long refused to release any additional information about the progress of the investigation or to give interviews to the media. Rocky Kennedy, the Lafayette County coroner, mentioned that there's a reason officials are not saying much. "This isn't a story that everyone will see until it reaches court," he said. "Certain delicate details in this case are tools to ensure that the person who committed this act is brought before court, convicted, serves the appropriate sentence, and is held accountable for what they've done." Kennedy said the media attention on this case has been overwhelming, but it doesn't change the nature of his work. "Every case I handle is important," said the coroner. "I try to give the same attention to every family who's lost someone. They've lost someone they loved." Michelle Miller, also involved in investigating Ali Kuthchiel's case, raised questions about missed warning signs in relationships and whether her demise could have been prevented. Brandon Teisfeld was charged with the crime. He faced the death penalty after being accused of Ellie Costiel's demise and alleged abduction. Despite delays caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, justice was served. Eventually, in August 2021, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence. Judge Kelly Luther sentenced him to life imprisonment, and he will have the possibility of parole when he turns 65. Brandon Feisfeld is currently incarcerated in the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Sunflower County, Mississippi. At the trial, when the verdict was read, Brandon Feisfeld showed some emotions and sincerely admitted to his involvement in the demise of Ellie Costiel. He acknowledged his guilt in the demise of Alexandria Costiel and was very emotional when he apologized to both her family and his own. A significant fact in this case was the finding of the forensic examination, which established that Alexandria Costiel had never been pregnant. We are left to speculate and ponder why a young and promising student at a popular university, who could have had a happy and fulfilling life, fabricated the existence of a non-existent child and spoke about it to all her friends for 3 months. It seems she sincerely believed in it and thought that this news would melt Brandon's heart and make it belong only to her. Unfortunately, a miracle did not occur. Her parents and friends are still mourning their dear Ellie. Tullahoma, Tennessee. Just over an hour south of Nashville, the residents of Tullahoma describe it as quaint and quiet. Most people know each other and the community is fairly close. In 2012, it was home to 24-year-old Erica Megan Sharpton. Erica went by Megan, and she was part of a big family who had moved around a bit before settling in Tullahoma. She was a hard worker, very goal-oriented, and her best friend said she was really funny, outgoing, and always pushed herself in every way. Megan was just 2 months away from graduating and had a promising career in the nursing field ahead of her. She was always busy but thrived in that environment, enjoying her part-time jobs waiting tables at a local steakhouse, as well as another at a nursing home. She was living with her partner of 3 years, Chris, and everyone said she had everything going for her in so many ways. On July 1st, Megan had made plans to go to her mother's house to see her sister, who was visiting from out of town. But soon after making dinner plans, Megan called her mother Kelly and explained that a last-minute job interview had come up and she would have to reschedule. Megan was excited and said she would even be getting an upfront payment straight away if she was lucky enough to get the job. A hardworking person always looking to progress, her family were just as excited. They wished her luck and agreed to catch up with her later. But hours would pass and neither her family, friends, or her partner Chris had heard anything about the interview. Megan was completely silent and wasn't answering her phone. Before long, it was past midnight and into the next day, and people were starting to worry. Whether the interview had gone well or not, they were hoping for her to tell them something. July 2nd, 2012, 1:20 a.m. It had been a very hot and dry day, and in the early morning hours, a couple of teenagers driving down a Wolt road happened upon a fire in amidst the trees. It was a very secluded and unfrequented area. The nearest building was a church about half a mile away, and the nearest home was way across the bridge. This wasn't a road you would have any reason to stop on. It was more just a place to pass through. The teens called emergency services thinking a forest fire had broken out, and they were worried it would spread. Authorities got there not long after, and quickly started combating the fire, which had spread quite a distance. Perhaps it was a campfire that had been left unattended, or a discarded cigarette, the first responders thought. But they didn't have to get very close to realize it was far from that. The fire had been set to try and burn a body, the body of Megan Sharpton. There was no car nearby and no one else was around. Megan had no ID, no keys, no purse, and no phone on her or anywhere near her. She was naked from the waist down, and the location and position of the fire confirmed that she was already dead before she was set on fire. One of the officers commented on how severe the blunt force trauma to her head was, as they could see how dented her skull was. Along with no identification, there had been no people recently reported missing they could look towards for an answer. But her distinctive t-shirt indicated she was a medical student and she had several tattoos, so police were able to put somewhat of a description out. Word traveled fast, and after seeing a Facebook post about a girl with star tattoos being found, Kelly had called in. Megan had star tattoos on her ankle representing her siblings, as well as one on her neck, and from these alone, Kelly knew straight away it was her daughter. It was brutal, shocking, and the community was left incredibly frightened as a result. Had she been killed on the way home from the interview? Had she even made it to the interview in the first place? Was the interviewer her killer, or was it a totally unrelated attack? Police started with the people closest to her, one of which was her partner Chris, and her family admitted they did briefly question him too. The couple had been on and off for a while, and her sister had said her first thought was that he had been involved, describing the couple as oil and water, and most definitely having their ups and downs. Chris told investigators the last time he had tried to call her, she didn't answer. When she didn't come back to the apartment that night, he just assumed she had slept at her mother's. A search of the apartment found blood in the bathroom, along with some needles, and this was enough to pull both Chris and his roommate Robbie in for more questions. As they were interviewing the pair, Megan's 1995 red Ford Mustang was located, 850 Shelfer Road. There was no blood found inside her car, and apart from the note, there was nothing of evidentiary value in there. But the address did not exist, and police determined it was likely used to lure Megan away. Back at the station, Robbie admitted that the drug paraphernalia was his, but said it was something he was battling alone and neither Chris nor Megan knew he used. Robbie did admit to investigators that he and Megan had been having a secret relationship. This made police wonder had Chris found out and killed her in a fit of rage. But Chris didn't know anything about the pair and was visibly shocked to hear about it. He acknowledged the issues within the couple's relationship, but officers recalled he was incredibly upset, visibly shaking and devastated to hear about her passing. This, along with a solid alibi from his workplace, ruled him out. Although Robbie couldn't provide an alibi, his phone activity showed he was texting Megan all night and into the early hours, worrying about where she was. Officers were also satisfied that he had played no part in her murder. Chris did give police something to work on, though. A random man had called one of Megan's phones on the day she was last seen. He was looking for someone to be a carer for his grandmother, and that Naomi had recommended her. Megan was keen to get more hands-on experience in the field she was looking to go into, and this was the perfect opportunity. This was the mystery job she had been so excited to tell people about, but this was the first time they had heard a name linked to it. The only Naomi Chris knew of was someone who had studied with Megan in the previous year. Police set about following up on this lead, but while they were doing this, something else was brought to their attention. As well as the name Naomi, the high-profile disappearance of 20-year-old Holly Bobo just 6 months prior gave detectives more to consider. Holly Bobo had also been studying nursing and had gone missing in the county of Decatur, around 130 miles away from Tullahoma. Authorities couldn't help but wonder if there was a link between her and Megan, and the community noticed similarities between the pair as well. The media started running with the idea that this could be the work of a serial killer, further fueling the fear amongst everyone. By process of elimination, they managed to get an address for the only Naomi they thought it could have been and headed over to her house. She wasn't home, so officers got hold of her phone number from a neighbor. They were surprised to hear that Naomi didn't recommend her for the job. She didn't even like Megan. She said she barely knew her, and the extent of their relationship was that they had carpooled to their classes together a couple of times. When asked why her name would have been mentioned, she said she had no idea. She wouldn't have recommended her for anything. Naomi told police she couldn't help any further, and the officers left, confused and frustrated, as this was the lead they were counting on. A short while later, Megan's autopsy results came back. The report revealed that she had been raped before being beaten and shot through her cheek. Although the blunt force trauma was so severe her skull was almost shattered, it was the bullet that had killed her. And authorities felt strongly that she was likely beaten with the gun. Although the phone Megan took with her that night was never located, Chris was able to find the phone that had received the call about the job. Finally, they had access to the mysterious number. The call had come from an unregistered, prepaid phone. 12 weeks after Megan had been found, investigators had something concrete. The number linked with the prepaid phone sent them to a store in Tullahoma where the phone was purchased. The cameras inside the store gave them a description of the man buying the phone. At one point, he put his own phone on the counter, indicating he was clearly buying another phone that would be harder to trace for a specific reason. The cameras follow the man outside, and he gets into a red pickup truck. The man would soon be identified as Timothy Gifford, known as Timmy, a small-time drug dealer, and police were surprised that his name could be linked to something this big. They tracked down the truck. His brother Paul was driving it. Paul said all he knew was that Timmy had bought it off a friend and given it to him. Timmy was tracked down. He was forthcoming and told police he had purchased the phone for a friend, coincidentally the same friend that had sold him the red truck. His friend's name was Donnie Frank Jones Jr., a name that was actually known to police. Donnie had a criminal record and would often act as a police informant, but the connection between Donnie and Megan was still unknown. Timmy said that Donnie had recently gone in for surgery and asked him to buy the phone for him as he couldn't. Donnie gave some of his painkillers to Timmy as payment. After this, Donnie texted Timmy telling him he wanted to trade in his truck for a Mustang and asked if he could help. Timmy said he didn't understand why. Donnie had several young children and his truck was far more practical. Nonetheless, Timmy agreed to help with the truck and passed it on to his brother. Timmy said the carpet, as well as other bits of the interior, had been very recently replaced. Donnie said his wife had told him it would probably sell quicker if the inside was newer. Only then did police finally work out the connection. Donnie Jones was the husband of Naomi Jones, the woman whose name had been used in the phone call to Megan, the woman they had already spoken to weeks before. Police now had the link they needed and went back to the couple's home, this time with the hopes of searching it. Donnie denied knowing Megan, but suddenly changed his story, and said he did remember giving her and his wife a lift to classes once or twice. Donnie said he was at home with his children on the night in question. He denied Timmy's claim about the phone and told detectives they could search his house and take a DNA swab, said he had nothing to hide. They looked around the home for a while but found nothing of any interest and left with just the DNA sample. While the results were pending, the nursing graduation ceremony Megan should have been a part of took place. Her 18 fellow students celebrated her life and paid tribute. The combined DNA index system, more commonly referred to as CODIS, is the central location for law enforcement. Compare the DNA profiles of individuals who have been convicted of a certain class of crime. CODIS software enables state, local, and national law enforcement to compare DNA profiles electronically, thereby linking crimes to each other and identifying suspects by matching DNA profiles together. Through this and the DNA sample, they confirmed a match to the rape test kit performed on Megan. The DNA came back to Donnie. He was pulled in for questioning, but was still adamant they had the wrong person. He said they never dated and never had a sexual relationship. He was then confronted with the DNA evidence. He quickly changed his story. He said that he and Megan had had a consensual sexual affair, but for obvious reasons were keeping it quiet. Although police knew he was lying, they were unable to disprove this and had no choice but to let Donnie go home. Donnie had been accused of rape in the past, and he also had prior felony convictions for aggravated burglary, aggravated assault, and forgery, and was thus prohibited from possessing a firearm. When police caught wind that he owned guns, this allowed them to obtain a search warrant and place him under arrest. They hoped this would give them more time to look into his potential involvement in Megan's murder. For months after Megan was found, the last pieces of evidence were in that would help police tie Donnie to the crime. The coroner had already confirmed the type of bullet that had gone through Megan's cheek. It was a match for the rifle that belonged to Donnie. The GPS evidence also placed Donnie at the crime scenes. The burner phone that was used to contact Megan was moving alongside Donnie's phone at the time, definitively putting the two phones together in Donnie's car. It had pinged off of several locations, the first being where they suspected Megan had been abducted and attacked, the second where they believed she had been murdered, and the third where her body was found. The location she was believed to have been killed in was a farm owned by his family. It was here that they found a partially burned scarf that belonged to Megan. Donnie Frank Jones Jr. was indicted with 2 counts of aggravated kidnapping, 2 counts of aggravated rape, and first-degree murder. His bail was set at $500,000, and prosecutors began to prepare for a trial. The burner phone showed that several people had actually been called by Donnie, and they were all people that either cared for the elderly or worked in nursing in some respect. He had been phoning random people, essentially hunting for a victim. Donnie then remembered Megan from giving her a lift a year prior. He used his wife's phone to get her number and used Naomi's name to lure her into a false sense of security. He gave her the fake address and directions that led to a desolate area where he was waiting. Phone records confirmed that his wife Naomi was at work on the night of the crime, and police said she had nothing to do with Megan's murder. They also found no connection between Donnie and Holly Bobo, with separate arrests being made in her case later down the line. Although the charges against Donnie were eligible for the death penalty, prosecutors never publicly stated whether or not they planned to seek it. Donnie Jones Jr. and to the plea of not guilty. But as the death penalty was potentially on the table, it was later said he was keen to cut a deal with the authorities instead. The exchange would be a confession for the removal of the death penalty. In February 2013, 37-year-old Donnie Jones Jr. pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder of Megan Sharpton. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, he soon asked to withdraw this, stating that his attorney had convinced him to say it. His wife had been threatened. Circuit Court Judge Curtis Smith heard and granted a new motion, but the original judgment soon went back into effect, and he is still serving life without parole. Megan's sister Carrie said, "If Megan hadn't lost her life, I feel very confident that Donnie Jones would still be out, trying to trick young women. Megan put him behind bars for life. She sacrificed her life to keep everybody else in our community safe." Kelly Sharpton, who had gone through such trauma losing her daughter in an unbearable way, often spoke of how the pain was all-consuming and relentless. Tragically, in November 2013, Kelly would take her own life. Officers working the case expressed the sadness they felt for Megan, stating her last few minutes of life was pure hell and panic and fear. A young woman with so much promise and so many plans, her life so cruelly snatched away. This, along with the devastating death of her mother Kelly, deeply affected many people. A 7-foot-tall memorial was created to honor Megan, and can be located where she was found that early morning. It is made up of 24 stars, one for each year of her life, and a nod to the tattoos that meant so much to her. Her sister said their family will be forever grateful to the community for their support and their dedication to helping them through it all. The case of Danielle Jennings. Danielle Jennings was born on September 16, 1978, in Columbia, South Carolina, United States. She grew up in Stockton, Georgia, with her mother and stepfather. Known for her cheerful and outgoing personality, Danielle faced adulthood early. At the age of 16, she became pregnant but was determined to be a good mother. Danielle's relationship with Carl, the father of her child, ended in divorce. In 1996, she gave birth to her son Tristan at the age of 17, and despite the difficulties ahead, was determined to provide the best life for herself and her son. Then she met Luis Piano, a man who would become Tristan's father. Danielle and Luis had known each other since they were teenagers, initially as friends. But their relationship developed into love. Luis took care of Danielle and Tristan, and for a time it seemed like all their problems had been solved. The couple moved in together, and Danielle secured an office job at a landscaping company, a position she was proud to have obtained. In December 1998, Luis proposed to Danielle, and she happily accepted. Her life was on the right track with a loving son, a fiancé, and promising career prospects. On March 15, 1999, Luis returned home from work to find his fiancée, 20-year-old Danielle Jennings, lying lifeless on the bed in their Ashley Lakes apartment in Norcross, Georgia. Their young son, Tristan, was at daycare at the time. Luis immediately realized Danielle was dead due to her skin color and called 911. When the police arrived, Luis was waiting for them and reported what he had found. He explained that upon entering the apartment, he saw Danielle lying face down on the bed, and when he turned her over, he discovered she was dead. The police naturally suspected Luis, and they took him in for questioning while a team of officers thoroughly examined the crime scene. Danielle was found lying on her back on the bed, fully clothed with a sock around her neck. This suggested that the perpetrator intended to kill her, leaving no chance for survival. The fact that the stocking was tied at the back indicated that the perpetrator was behind Danielle when they strangled her. The crime scene showed signs of disarray, with the bed messed up and a dresser drawer open. It's possible that the perpetrator took the stocking from Danielle's drawer. The contents of her purse had been dumped and rummaged through, leading police to consider the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. However, several valuable items, including cameras and jewelry, were left untouched. This led police to speculate that the perpetrator may have intended to steal something but encountered Danielle and decided to kill her to avoid being identified as a witness. The lack of forced entry at the front door and the locked sliding glass door in the backyard raised suspicions that the crime scene might have been staged. Despite searching the surrounding area, police found no evidence. After investigating the crime scene, police discovered that Danielle may have let the killer into her home voluntarily, or that the killer had a key to the apartment. As a result, the prime suspect became Danielle's fiancé, Luis Piano. When police started questioning Luis, he displayed intense emotions. Police were aware that romantic relationships can sometimes escalate into anger, leading to devastating consequences. To begin the interrogation, they asked Luis about his whereabouts on the day of Danielle's death. Luis claimed he spent the entire day at work. He last saw Danielle when they both left their apartment at 6:45 a.m., but she returned briefly to retrieve something. According to Luis, Danielle was anxious about an important meeting with management at work and seemed slightly distracted. He also mentioned that Danielle called him at 11:30 a.m. to invite him to lunch, but he declined due to his heavy workload. tried to contact Daniel later that day but couldn't reach her. Concerned, he called her co-workers, who told him she had gone out for lunch but failed to return to work. Luis then contacted their home, where he spoke to someone named Lise, who also hadn't heard from Danielle. Luis left work to check on Danielle at their home in the Ashley Lakes apartments. When he arrived, he found something unsettling. The front door was unlocked. Upon entering, he saw a jar on the floor. During the investigation into Danielle's death, police questioned Luis about his relationship with her. They asked if the couple had frequent arguments or domestic problems. Luis insisted that their relationship was good and that they loved each other very much. Clearly feeling confused, he became frustrated with the questioning, believing that the police were wasting their time by focusing on him. He insisted that they should find the real culprit, who was still at large. Police also spoke to Danielle's friends and family, all of whom sided with Luis. Luis and Danielle were madly in love and were planning their wedding. However, their happiness did not last long. During the investigation into Danielle's case, Luis's co-workers confirmed that he had been at work all day, providing him with a solid alibi and eliminating him as a suspect. During the interrogation, Luis said that Danielle's co-worker Jeff was showing her too much attention and she was unhappy about it. The police immediately went to Danielle's workplace and spoke to her boss. Danielle's boss confirmed to the police that Danielle had complained about an employee named Jeff. Jeff was a middle-aged man who was a manager at the company. Danielle complained to her boss that Jeff was constantly hanging around her, interfering with her work, and behaving inappropriately. There was a significant age difference between Danielle and Jeff. He was 40 years old and she was 20. Jeff invited Danielle to lunch, and Danielle told him that she had a fiancé. She refused to go to lunch with Jeff. The company where Danielle worked took her complaints seriously. On the day of her murder, she had a meeting regarding a complaint she had filed with management against Jeff. She was very nervous about it. She feared that her career might be in jeopardy because she was a new employee and Jeff was her manager. Her co-workers mentioned that Danielle had gone home for lunch after this meeting but had not returned. That gave the police a time frame for when Danielle's attack occurred. The investigation revealed Jeff's involvement, especially when it was discovered that he was absent from the office at the time of the crime and did not return until later in the evening. Police focused on Jeff as a suspect, possibly following Danielle home and attacking her when she opened the door, which would explain the lack of signs of entry. Jeff was called in for questioning and asked to describe his relationship with Danielle. He admitted that he invited her to lunch but denied his involvement in her death. Jeff didn't deny liking her, however. He claimed he had not behaved inappropriately towards Danielle and was surprised when she filed a complaint against him. The investigators asked him if Danielle's complaint was a reason for wanting to harm her. His first reaction to this question was anger. He was adamant that he wasn't the one who took her life. Jeff claimed that he couldn't have been the one who attacked Danielle because he had an alibi. According to him, he was with another colleague, and they were driving around the city solving some work issues. They had been together all day, so he couldn't be the one who took Danielle's life. Jeff told investigators the name of the coworker whom he claimed he was with at the time of the crime. The detectives met with this man, and he confirmed Jeff's words. Thus, they excluded another person from the list of suspects. The next day, investigators received the autopsy report and examined it in the hope of getting some clues that would help them track down the perpetrator. The cause of Danielle's death was asphyxia. It seemed evident that Danielle's attack had taken her by surprise. The investigators concluded that someone had come up to her from behind and pulled the stocking tight until she lost consciousness. After that, the perpetrator tied the stocking in a knot so Danielle could not regain consciousness. There were no defensive injuries on her body. In fact, there were no injuries at all except for the ligature mark on her neck. Perhaps Danielle didn't even see the face of the one who attacked her. The police found no evidence at the crime scene that could help identify the perpetrator. No shoe prints, no DNA, no fingerprints, no hair. There was no evidence to send to the laboratory for analysis. Since the police had no new suspects, they returned to the version that what happened was a robbery that went wrong. They asked Luis to go through the apartment with them again. He carefully examined everything and said that nothing was missing from the apartment. All the things seemed to be in their usual places. However, a few days later, Lou called the police and said he could not find Danielle's wedding ring. He also drew the attention of investigators to another strange detail. The stocking that someone strangled Danielle with did not belong to her. According to Louise, she didn't wear stockings at all. It meant that whoever had done it had brought the stocking with them. Lacking any evidence, the investigators decided to look into Danielle's past. Perhaps what happened to her was connected with her past. They asked her friends about her previous relationships, in particular, her relationship with Carl, the father of her son Tristan. Her best friend told the police about Danielle's ex-boyfriend Eddie. She started dating him when she was already pregnant. Eddie was a violent guy, and as their relationship progressed, he became more domineering and tried to control all aspects of her life. It got to the point where he forbade her to see her friends and family. The relationship with Eddie deteriorated even more after Danielle gave birth to her son. Soon after, Eddie started using illegal substances, and Danielle decided it was time to end this relationship. She moved out and tried to start a new life, but Eddie had other plans. He did not accept rejection and behaved unpredictably. As a result, Danielle had to seek a restraining order against him. He violated it several times, called Danielle, parked near her house, and once even showed up at her work. Danielle's family told investigators that Eddie had called her several times in recent months. He told her to meet with him, but she always hung up. Eddie was the perfect suspect, so detectives tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. The man was hostile, and he wasn't eager to go to the police station. However, Eddie had an alibi. He said that Eddie was towing cars out of state at the time of the murder and that Eddie's boss, along with service logs and other receipts, could back him up. When the police confirmed his alibi, they released Eddie. 3 days after Danielle died, Danielle's neighbor, Kirk, called the police and told them about something that had happened to Kirk the week before the murder. Ms. Kirk said that recently in the apartment complex, residents often encounter a maintenance worker. The maintenance worker said he came to do a repair order. However, Ms. Kirk said that she felt very uncomfortable the whole time he was there because he kept staring at Kirk as if he was more concerned with her than completing the repair order. The same thing happened to another woman. The maintenance worker insisted that he was there to change a light bulb. When the landlord said there were no bulbs to change, he mumbled and staggered, "Maybe I have the wrong apartment," then backed up and walked away. Police investigations revealed that the complex had several maintenance workers, but the one who matched the descriptions of both women was Calvin Oliver, 42. According to records, Calvin had only started working at the complex in September 1998. At the time of Danielle's murder, 10 residents had reported cash, checks, and other valuables, including jewelry, computers, and guns missing from their apartments without evidence of forced entry. Some even suggested that someone on the maintenance staff was responsible. Calvin Oliver was brought in for questioning by the police, who initially asked him about a series of burglaries at the Ashley Lakes apartments. Calvin denied any involvement in the burglaries. When asked about Danielle Jennings, he said he had heard about what happened to her but did not know her. The only thing he confessed was that he had worked in her apartment. The police were about to release Calvin for lack of concrete evidence when they ran a final check of Calvin's database. The results were horrifying. They discovered that Calvin had an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear in court on a theft charge related to the theft of a personal check. According to Georgia Department of Correction records, Calvin had a long-standing adult criminal record dating back to 1974. His convictions included multiple residential burglaries, armed robbery, robbery by force, and at least one count of forcibly pressuring a woman into intimate contact at knife point. As a result, Calvin spent the majority of his life incarcerated. Given his extensive criminal history, it's surprising he was able to get a job at Ashley Lakes Apartments. The police took Calvin Oliver into custody, which allowed them to thoroughly investigate his potential involvement in Danielle Jennings' death. As part of their ongoing inquiry into a string of thefts at Ashley Lakes Apartments, the police obtained a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. During the search, they discovered stolen items from other residents, and the police discovered Danielle's wedding ring in his home. This discovery directly linked Oliver to Danielle's death. When the police questioned him about the wedding ring, Calvin claimed that he had stolen it about 3 weeks before Danielle's death. However, this claim was proven false. Calvin became a suspect and refused to cooperate with police after being caught lying. At trial, the prosecution argued that Calvin killed Danielle after she caught him breaking into her home. After a 5-day trial that ended on October 13, 2000, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. As a result, Calvin Oliver received a life sentence for the murder of Danielle Jennings and an additional 20 years for the burglary. A subsequent investigation revealed that Ashley Lake Apartments management knew about Calviner's history of run-ins with the law and his lengthy criminal record. Despite this knowledge, they failed to conduct thorough background checks and failed to warn other residents when a series of burglaries occurred. When these facts came to light, Danielle's family filed a lawsuit against Ashley Lake Apartments that they argue that the evidence demonstrates a reckless disregard for the safety of others. After a trial, a jury returned a verdict of more than $13 million for Danielle's wrongful death. The complex's key policy was also flawed, prosecutors said. Employees had access to house keys, and the lock boxes containing keys to the complex's 240 apartments were often left unsecured. Calvin Oliver is now serving a life sentence in prison. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.